Welcome inside episode 642 of the Locked On Senators podcast. I'm Ross Levitan on the outskirts of enemy territory in Winnipeg, Manitoba, alongside Brandon Piller up in the Blue Mountains, and we're going to do something a little different on today's show.
Yeah, Ross, we're getting the boys from Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone, and Steele Rodin on to join us to tell you all about the upcoming fantasy season.
It is draft season, so let's get into it. This is the Locked On Senators podcast. It's your team every day.
Locked On Senators, your daily podcast on the Ottawa Senators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back to the continuing preseason coverage here on Locked On Senators. It's the Locked On crossover edition with the Locked On Fantasy Hockey podcast, and we figure this is a perfect time, not only for Ottawa, but everywhere around the league in general. You're setting up for your drafts. Who are the sleepers and who are guys you need to avoid come draft night? So with that, we bring on Steele Rodin and Flip Livingstone, both from Locked On Fantasy Hockey podcast. Flip, we'll start with you. What's going on, brother? How are you?
You know what, Ross? Living the dream. I appreciate coming on this show. I've done a lot of talking about the Ottawa Senators this offseason, and for good reason. I'm sure both of you guys have had some good times in this offseason, and, I'm just ready for the puck to drop. I'm ready to make some bets, but thanks for having us on. I'm ready to chat some Sens with you guys.
Appreciate it. And you guys are both in the heart of enemy territory, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Hey, Steele, you too?
Sure. Yes, sir.
Yeah, we are both in the center of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Look, we try not to discuss them and we try not to be biased, but sometimes it just comes out when we're talking fantasy hockey and just the general NHL. There's a lot to discuss about the Toronto Maple Leafs, whether it's just in the media or the players themselves. So we get in some heated discussions, but we try to keep it.
That's
unbiased.
awesome. Well, our podcast started where you would have done a lot of radio talk there at the basement of College of Sports Media. Yep. So that's where we got going. We had, 20 episodes, Pillsy, of Making Sense of the Sens down there before we left school?
Yeah, at least 20 episodes. Yeah, we were grinding. Those were in the good old days of the 2017 playoff run, though.
Yeah, we started the pod. We're like, dude, this is easy. The team's buzzing. They beat the Bruins. They beat the Rangers. Go double overtime, game 7. Yeah. Like, this is going to be a great team to get a hold of. But Flip, as you said, times have changed going into this season now after a great summer. We'll get into the Senators a little bit later, but I want to get into what you guys are doing with the Locked On Fantasy Hockey podcast. You took over it, middle of last year, give or take, if I'm not mistaken. Steele, why don't you walk us through how you guys got on to Locked On and then what you guys have accomplished so far with the pod?
Yeah, so funny story. I was actually doing a podcast on YouTube with one of my buddies from College of Sports Media, David Crosby. It's called NHL Quick Hits. We just take 10 minutes each day, do a little rundown every Sunday. We post the episode on Mondays, and we would just do sleeper picks, guys you should look forward to on the waiver wire, just small little quick hits. And Locked On, Sean Woodley from Locked On Podcast Network reached out. Crosby said he was unavailable and that I was available, so I started connecting with Sean a little bit, and then he introduced me to Flip. We hopped on a Zoom call, and honestly, right from the get-go, we had this vibe, we had this chemistry. The conversation flowed really nicely. And it kind of just took off from there. We started, I believe, late January, early February, I believe it was. So we've been at it for about 8.5 months, and we've really seen the growth over the offseason, the last couple of months, especially ramping back up into this new season. We've been extremely happy with our growth so far. We're almost at 400 subscribers. And yeah, Flip, I think we've been doing a pretty good job so far.
Hey, we're not in the Locked On Sens territory. We got to give credit where credit is due. You guys have been grinding. But yeah, hey, we're fantasy hockey heads. We like talking bets. We love talking hockey. I worked at the Score for a number of years covering the NHL, so this is a nice thing to get back into it. But hey, it's all about hockey, and it's all about providing some good insight for the listeners, especially when it comes to maybe making a buck or two, and hopefully for what we're going to do for your listeners, highlight a couple of awesome fantasy players for them.
Flip, what do you prefer, daily fantasy, or do you like the grind of the waiver wire throughout the full season?
I'm getting into daily fantasy more and more with each passing season. It is a very intriguing setup, especially for the degenerate gamblers out here. But I'm a traditionalist. I like the old school year long because I feel like it's a little bit more of a long game for research-wise, pegging minor league players, finding some prospects, diamonds in the rough. Don't get me wrong, you can do that in DFS too. But yeah, good question. I like the long form.
So when you guys are going about doing your podcast, what can listeners kind of expect to get from tuning into an episode of Locked On Fantasy Hockey?
Steele, you want to handle that one?
Well, honestly, I think they can just expect a fire episode. I think we really bring the energy every single episode. Whether, I think for the most part, Flip and I are on the same page. I think we think alike. We're very similar in that way when we talk and debate about it over topics involving fantasy hockey players and just teams overall. But there are some times where we butt heads a little bit and we go back and forth, and that's when the energy really kicks in and really hits. And I think that's what we bring best to the table is, again, like I said, right from the get-go, we had this vibe, we had this energy that really matched well with one another.
Fantasy takes, bets, bold predictions, a lot of flapping off at the gums, a little bit of everything, boys, a little bit of everything.
That's awesome. Steele, what's planned for this upcoming season? I feel like this is where you guys butter your bread right now, though, coming in. I mean, Of course, you got to follow all along, all season long. You get the waiver wire, who to pick up, who's hot, who's not. But this draft season, it's got to be the boom for you guys, no?
Yeah, it's been pretty busy. Like I said, things have been ramping up, and the channel has been absolutely on fire recently. But yeah, Flip and I have done a couple of recent mock drafts. We've tried to get some different angles on things. Whether you're in the first overall pick, the last overall pick, somewhere in the middle as well. I just did a mock draft as well, where I took the angle of you have to pick the best available player, because that's what some people do. Some people have that strategy of, you know what, he's the best available player, that's going to make my team so much better than everyone else's. But that's not the case majority of the time. So trying these different angles, giving the listeners and the viewers something new to tune into every single day.
So what's something, as you guys are doing this pod, that maybe before you started looking into fantasy and covering it on such an intense basis like you are now, Flip, I'll throw this one to you. What's something that you've kind of learned and adjusted from now that you're covering fantasy hockey a little bit more closely, rather than what maybe the average fan wouldn't be looking at?
Yeah, I think right off the top, and it's a topic of conversation that's always hot on our show, is goalies and what you do with your goaltending roster. It's always it's an enigma. It's sometimes, you can't put your finger on it. You got to get lucky. But also, it's not always do or die if you don't get an Igor Shesterkin or Andrei Vasilevsky right off the top of the draft. I think what I've learned is, even from some of our guests that we've had on, is you can maybe wait. And this year is a really good example, even in Ottawa. I know Cam Talbot is the number one. I really think Anton Forsberg is going to get some looks. I think he's going to get some starts. And as much as I know they bring in Cam Talbot to be that quote unquote number one, if you will, I don't think he's necessarily all cut out to handle that many games. So this season is one of those years that you can really pick and choose where you take your goalie, because there's so many splits across the league, at least heading into the season.
Yeah, I feel like goalies are kind of similar to quarterbacks in fantasy football. Either you can reach and try to get the upper echelon guys right away because they're going to have value, or you can try to wait it out, pick on other categories where you're not going to have as many options down the road, and then try to take a sleeper goalie. Yep. Is that kind of a strategy that you guys would kind of co-sign onto, is going for later round sleeper goalies?
I'm not speaking for Steele, but I think it would really all depend on the format and the breakdown of your league. Is it head-to-head? Is it weighted heavily on goalie stats? Some leagues load up on players and you got wins, saves, and maybe shutouts. So then I would say, you could definitely employ that strategy and wait. Others, like I was mentioning to you guys off air, dynasty keeper leagues, goalies can get you a huge amount of points on a regular basis. And if you have a backup goalie or goalies who aren't there, I'm going to tell you from experience, you're going to be finishing in the bottom half of that league.
Yeah, I've always been the other kind of route. I like taking my goalies a little bit earlier than other people. I think having two strong goaltenders is crucial to, again, dominating any fantasy league. For this season, my strategy is always drafting my first goaltender within the first 3 rounds of any draft, and then hopefully getting my second goaltender around the 7th or 8th. And I know that's a little bit early, but I feel like having those two starting goaltenders, true starting goaltenders in the league, makes the biggest difference in your fantasy leagues. And then on top of that, waiting a little bit to get a third goalie, because I think, again, having 3 goalies that can cycle in and out every single week makes or breaks your team.
All right, well, we've got the yin and yang here, Pilsy? One guy says later, one not. If you were to see this goalie come across the wire, how quick are you scooping him up?
That's Brady Tkachuk, if you can't tell.
Yeah.
Oh no,
well,
I
hey,
know. I'm not.
I heard he
quite
can
sure
drop
I would
the
have
mitts,
to pick
though.
him up.
I heard.
Yeah, you're going to get your Pims in the goalie category. That's for sure.
This might be a good banger league goalie, I think.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, good little laugh there to finish off segment 1. Coming up, we're going to ask Flip and Steele, which Ottawa Senators are they eyeing, whether it's early, mid, or late round? And we'll wrap up with a league-wide look at who you need to have and need to avoid on draft night. All right, all that coming up. Stick with us on a crossover edition of Locked On Senators and Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Hope you're enjoying our chat with Flip and Steele. We'll get right back to it, but first, a word from our friends at Built Bar.
Ross, it's the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. We love Built Bars, and the big reason why is they figure out how to make these protein bars taste good. Then how do they make them healthy? A perfect example of that, Ross, some of our favorites are the new Built Puffs. It's marshmallow chocolate bars. You might be thinking, okay, well, that's not healthy. Yeah, but protein-infused marshmallow makes it healthy and delicious. Ross, we both got a care package from our friends at Built Bar. Why don't you show the good people what we got in store?
Well, yeah, I just muted my mic because you can hear the crumbling and nobody likes that, especially the audio listeners, but I'm going to try to hold it up here. The Built Bars, we got cookies and cream, one of my favorites as well. And this is the craziest part. Look at that. It's covered in chocolate. It's 130 calories. Can you believe it? 130 calories. Let's go through the rest here for this nutritional treat. And this is per 1 serving. It's a 49-gram bar. You're only going to get 3% of your daily recommended value of fats. Yes, 8% of them are saturated fats. No trans fat in it. You're looking at 7% of your total carbohydrates. 18 grams of carbs in this. 17 grams of protein, and you're looking at only 4 grams of sugars. Now, that's where it really gets impressive. Only 4 grams of sugar in this delicious Built Bar. Look, I got that. I got the coconut Built Bar. Are you serious? Which one do you like, man? We got raspberry here. I shouldn't say which one do you like. Which one do you like best when it comes to your Built Bars?
You can't beat the cookies and cream, Ross. I mean, I'm a big cookies and cream guy, so to have that with some health attached to it, it's the best. And Ross, they're bringing back one of my favorite flavors. It's German chocolate cake. I love it. Yes. You can have your cake and eat it too. Indulge in delicious German chocolate with real pecans, coconut, and 17 grams of protein.
And you can just tell, I just took a bite of one right now. You can tell it's so nice texture-wise. You expect it sometimes when it's covered in chocolate to be like hard and crunchy. No, it's soft. They're easy to chew, and they're absolutely delicious, Pillsy. Hit them with the promo code.
Absolutely, guys. You gotta head to Built.com to snag a box for you and the family. It's the perfect treat. Or, like Ross and I do, we find a really good hiding place and hoard them for ourselves so our partners don't get any of them because they're that delicious. Go to Built.com, use promo code LOCKEDON15 and get 15% off your next order. One more time, guys, that's Built.com. Promo code LOCK15 for 15% off your next order. It's Built Bar, the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. Now, as Ross finishes his delicious treat, let's head back to our interview with the Locked On Fantasy Hockey guys, Steele and Flip.
All right, Pillsy and Flip and Steele with us from the Locked On Fantasy Hockey podcast. Flip, you've been saying you talked a lot of Sens this summer. Who's the first Senator off the board in your mind when it comes to draft day?
That is a very, very good question. And maybe last year it would be clear cut. This year there's a lot of good options, but I still think it's got to be Brady Tkachuk. Okay. I think he's in for an absolutely beast mode type season, fantasy or otherwise. I know he's had the C now for a little while. He's now got some pieces around him that I think is going to up really those top 3 lines. And looking at the top 3 lines earlier today, I think this scoring attack is very balanced in Ottawa. Maybe some might say that might take away from Brady Tkachuk's output. I think it's going to add to it this season. And in my opinion, Brady Tkachuk is right on the peripheral as being like, a top 10, top 15 fantasy option. And I'm excited to see what he can do this year. But if it's me, it's Brady Tkachuk.
I like that. And
I
is that
completely
even
agree.
sorry, Steele, is that even if a league doesn't have PIMS, or is that a pretty big reason why you've got him in the mix?
I would take him even if a league doesn't have PIMS. I know he brings that element and that really fills it out for banger leagues. But I just think that the offensive output in Ottawa this year, the sky's the limit. Obviously, chemistry is a thing. We haven't seen DeBrincat or Giroux play in the mix yet, but I don't think we need to be concerned about that. There is a lot of talent going on. I think that, I would take Brady Tkachuk regardless of the layout. I really do think he's going to be that good this year.
Yeah, and you look at shots on goal. This guy's always near the top of the league for that.
Yeah.
So, Steele, are you on board with that, or would you go with maybe a DeBrincat, a Stützle, one of those guys?
I'm completely on board with Brady Tkachuk. I think if he somehow falls to the third round, everyone in the league has already made a mistake because he's that big of he has that much value to a fantasy team. And like you said, 288 shots, 277 hits, 68 points last year, and he did that with 117 penalty minutes. He's in the box for 117 minutes the entire season, which was fifth most in the league last year, which is absolutely crazy. So I think if he can somehow cut that, his penalty time down a little bit, he has the potential of getting over 300 shots, over 300 hits, and even getting up to 80, 85 points potentially.
Yeah, I mean, he has led the Ottawa Senators in points in back-to-back seasons. And one thing, too, with Brady Tkachuk, why I put a little extra value on him, and maybe you guys can speak to this, is I find there's not a lot of strength at the left wing position. So you can kind of grab the top guys, and then there's a big gap. And then like Steele, you talked about just taking best player available. Obviously, that sounds like a smart strategy, but then you get to the end of the draft, and you're like, I have 6 right wingers and no left wingers. So sometimes it's like, okay, I'm going to stock up on the good left wingers early because I know there's not going to be a whole lot of them hanging around.
That's smart, actually. I like that strategy. What about Thomas Chabot? Obviously, he's the top defenseman for the Ottawa Senators. I think in a fantasy landscape as well, he's going to be getting those first unit power play minutes. Like league wide, are you looking at a handful, 15? Where do you think he ends up falling when it looks at all the defensemen on your board?
It is a really good question. I love what Thomas Chabot brings to the table. I'm a little bit concerned about how much reliance the team has to potentially have on him this year. Don't get me wrong. I'm not the expert of the depth chart down the depth chart in Ottawa, but something tells me that they are going to count on him to eat a ton of minutes this year in all situations. And that just makes me nervous about overall fantasy output, injuries and otherwise, but every other reason, Thomas Chabot is a stud. A little bit of a shortened season last year with an injury. I think a full healthy, 82 game season this year for Chabot, 50, 55 points is well in the realm of his ability, in my opinion.
Yeah, now one of the guys that's going to be targeted a lot for the Ottawa Senators in fantasy hockey is going to be Alex DeBrincat, 40-plus goal scorer in the prime of his career, going to get a chance to play with Tim Stützle and Claude Giroux. Now, one thing a lot of people hint to, and it's very obvious, go back and watch Alex DeBrincat's highlights of last season. A lot of those goals are assisted by Patty Kane, one of the best players in this generation. So switching from playing with Patty Kane to Tim Stützle may be a bit of an adjustment. Do you guys see that change in chemistry as kind of hindering DeBrincat, and you got to be a little bit safe with him in your projections? Or do you think Tim Stützle can do enough that a guy with a shot like Alex DeBrincat is still going to thrive?
Yeah, I think it obviously hinders his value a little bit. Obviously, going from a guy like Patrick Kane to Tim Stützle, who still has a lot of talent, but he's still going to be one of those top guys that I'm looking to draft on my team. He's still a natural goal scorer. Yeah, he's able to score from tough angles on the ice. He's got quick hands and quick feet. For being a small guy like himself. But again, he's surrounded now with a lot more talented guys. It's not just Patrick Kane. Yep. It's Tim Stützle. It's Josh Norris. It's Brady Tkachuk. It's Drake Batherson. It's Claude Giroux. And, for the first little bit, he might be set on that second line, but he's going to get mixed and matched a little bit. I have to assume so, as well as getting a lot of power play time. So I think the fact that he's got some more talent to play with kind of balances out just losing Patrick Kane from the Chicago Blackhawks.
Yeah, the highlight reel though, it does paint a
Yeah,
picture.
it does. Yeah.
There's a clear pattern to Alex DeBrincat's goals, that's for sure.
But hey, I mean, the result
ahead,
is that it's on its stick, off his stick, and that's a talent that transfers to wherever
Yeah,
you're
that's what I'm
playing.
saying.
I'm not
Exactly.
saying Tim Stützle's Patrick Kane,
Yeah.
but there is some stylistic comparisons about him enjoying holding onto the puck and creating space with a wide stride in the offensive zone, and then trying to make plays through seams and that sort of thing. And I asked Mark Mathot this, and he was more so like, maybe not, but I think that in practice it could help. Where DeBrincat's looking at Timmy, and he's like, hey, in this situation, Kane will do this. Maybe try something similar. And then having Giroux there, obviously, as the wily vet, but a guy who can still put up points. Where are you guys at with Claude Giroux? Like, obviously playing with two elite offensive players. My hot take, he's 77 points away from 1,000 in his career. I think he hits it in the final game of the season. That's a lot for him. It's, I think, 11 more than he had last year. I think he was around 65, 67 in between a brutal Flyers team. But then I think he finished with 20 and 18 games with the Florida Panthers. I know it's a high bar, but like, are you guys seeing him as maybe a guy who you could get later on in drafts, or will the height of who he's playing with push him higher?
I think you can wait a little bit. And I actually did draft him later in the rounds. I believe I got him in like the 12th or 13th. He fell tremendously. And I was very surprised to see him fall that far, in my opinion. I think he should go around the 7th or 8th round. I think you can wait that long because as of right now, I believe he's ranked 49th overall on Yahoo Fantasy on fantasy leagues. I think you can wait a little bit. I don't see him getting 77 points this season.
Come on.
I look. I don't even think Tim Stützle gets 77 points this season. Flip and I have gone back and forth with this. I don't think Tim Stützle gets 77 points.
I think we have to put something on that. Pillsy, we'll think about it.
We already
at the end of the show.
We already do.
Oh, what's the standing bet?
I said over 80 points for Stützle.
Okay.
Steele thinks he doesn't scratch it. And, to answer your point, your question a little bit about DeBrincat's output, I think if they can form – the chemistry is my question, right? New pieces. All day long, the Ottawa Senators this summer have been talked up as the winners of the offseason. Hats off to Pierre Dorion. All of those things are true. The puck has to drop, and we have to see what happens. Because if you think that the rest of the teams in the Atlantic aren't also paying attention, they are paying attention. And trust me, it's a lot different once that puck drops, and we all know that.
Hey, do you guys think Sens fans are hyped for the season or what? Take a look what our friend at Sens Talk posted today. I'll pull it up as an extra screen here, but these guys are in one scrimmage together, and they're already going side to side with the greatest line in Ottawa Senators history, all lined up. So
expectations sky high.
No pressure, kids, but I think that's where having Giroux is just such an important aspect to this offseason because you add a high-flying scorer like DeBrincat. Yeah, that's great. He's still 24 years old. You love that. 2 years left under team control, one, and then obviously he needs a new contract, but still an RFA after this year. Having Giroux to me just completes the whole thing. And then so you guys talking about Tim Stützle, how much better is it going to be now the puck's on the team stick starting off faceoffs? He was 32% or 35% in the dot. And now he's not going to have to take faceoffs. Giroux comes in, slides in on the strong side. I believe he's a 59% faceoff guy over the last couple of years. So I think that's going to be a huge benefit for his game as well. Pillsy, do you have any other questions about the Senators in particular before we change over to league-wide sleepers and guys you want to avoid?
Not so much a question, but just kind of to get a non-Sens fan opinion on this. One guy that I've kind of targeted as a breakout player fantasy-wise that you could get real late in drafts is Mathieu Joseph. How do you guys feel about him? Because I'm looking at his elite prospects now, and sure, career high of 30 points this season. Usually he gets in the 20s, so nothing that's going to hop out at you. But
Pillsy, he's first in Sens history in points per game.
Yeah, exactly. He showed really well when he was here. And the thing I'm highlighting is his time on ice changed drastically when he went from Tampa Bay to Ottawa. And Tampa Bay, usually less than 15 minutes. In Ottawa, usually more than 15 minutes, and getting some power play time on kind of a non-Tampa Bay Lightning roster, we'll say that. So how do you guys and kind of the rest of the hockey community view the chance of Mathieu Joseph having a breakout season here, at least comparatively to his past seasons?
Well, NHL Network had him on their list of potential breakout candidates. I don't know if that's for fantasy purposes or not, but he's caught the eye of some people. How about yours?
I think what intrigues me the most with his potential is where he's lining up this year in the lineup. I know that it's projections and we don't know how the actual lineup is going to end up shaking out. But if he's paired with Alex Formenton and Shane Pinto, I think there's a lot of upcoming upside with those three players. And, young players, all three of them, unsure really what their careers are going to hold. But all three, I love Alex Formenton's game. I really think Shane Pinto is a bit slept on. And, Joseph right here, it could be a breakout year. I'm going to say maybe we're 1 year ahead of that. Next year, I could see a stepping out for him. Also, realistically, how much minutes are those top six going to eat? We'll see what his opportunity ends up being. That could be a concern. So I would say maybe wait 1 year, but he's close.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Steele, before we get off this topic, who's a sleeper for you on the Sens? Maybe a guy later on that you're going to take a chance on to close out your bench and be like, okay, there's a little upside there.
Yeah, Flip and I actually talked about this in one of our mock back, Jake Sanderson. I really like this guy coming in and filling out, obviously being on the bottom line with Nikita Zaitsev. I think that's going to give him the experience he needs, obviously, but I'm excited about him and what he can do for the Senators defense as well. He looks very composed with the puck, back with University of Dakota, I believe it was.
Nodak,
the
Nodak Sens, buddy.
Yep.
We had four of them there during the pandemic.
I think he's a really smart player. And so I actually did draft him in one of my leagues, I think with my last pick, as well as in that mock draft with Flip. But that's one of the guys that I'm able to take a shot with one of the prospects in the later rounds, because let's see what he can do in the first couple of weeks, the first month maybe. And then, there's a ton of players that I can pick up on the waiver wire. It's just a chance, a risk or a gamble, but I think he can be a good upside on the defensive end.
So we're recording.
Not him. I would say Anton Forsberg. Sorry to cut you guys off. But
hey, to talk Anton Forsberg, you can cut me off every day of the week. That guy was a stud last year.
I really think, though, that Ottawa fans know about this guy, but outside of that group, I think people need to pay attention a little bit because, like I said, Cam Talbot struggles a little bit. I don't think they're going to hesitate to give Forsberg a full shot at that cage. I don't know why they wouldn't.
Yeah, agreed. To me, he's the opening night starter right now. I know. I don't even know if it's that much of a hot take, but I mean, Pillsy and I were in the building. I know you guys have your blue blood, but how many saves did he put up in that home opener, Pillsy?
It was like 44 or something like that.
48.
Yeah, it was
career high, 3-2 win.
Yeah, he's the kind of guy, and the stat we love throwing out there is he had 6 wins when he had 40-plus saves. Like, the more shots he gets, the better, and he's in a good spot in Ottawa with that decor to get shots. So he's the kind of guy where he can really inflate his numbers and save percentage with just a high volume of shots and him getting in the groove. So we really like Forsberg here on this show.
100%.
Yeah.
Great stuff. And then, Steele, you mentioned Sanderson. We're hoping that he even starts out with Travis Hamonic. It seems like that could be the play.
Right now. Yeah.
So that'd be nice. Yeah, we're hoping 22's up.
I think that would be way more beneficial for Nikita Zaitsev.
Definitely.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you could put Pillsy with Sanderson. You might get the same output as you do with number 22.
2 left shots. Maybe you don't want that, but I'll do my best.
No disrespect to Pillsy, though.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, he was at the rookie tournament a couple weekends ago, and the Sens had so many injuries in that second game. I told him to bring his gear, but no dice. Hey, you know what he is good at, though? I hate to pump your tires, Pillsy, but you are a pretty good fantasy hockey player. So coming up, we will look around the league, not only with Pillsy, but obviously we got the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. So stick with us here on a Locked On crossover edition. All right, you're listening to Locked On Senators, Locked On Fantasy Hockey. We've got Steele, Rodin, Flip, Livingstone, Brandon Piller, and I'm Ross Levitan. You can follow them on Twitter as well. Is it LO_fantasy hockey? What's the play on it?
I believe we are LO_fantasy NHL, but I appreciate that.
Yeah.
There you go. There's the plug. LO_fantasy NHL. Looking at it right now. Go give them a follow on Twitter. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. Growing rapidly. And again, this is the time of year you want to be locked on to the Fantasy Hockey Boys. All right. Easy question, potentially. Who's your first overall pick in the draft?
This is something we've actually noticed the last couple of mock drafts as well. And I've actually talked to quite a few people alongside with Flip, but Draisaitl has gone first overall the last couple of mock drafts.
No
and
way.
And we discussed this, but like when you're specifically in those positional leagues where you have 2 centermen, 2 left wingers, because he has that dual eligibility of center left winger, it makes him a little bit more valuable. But I think the overall census or consensus should be Connor McDavid.
Yeah. I was gonna say, like,
I don't
even
think
that
we
high,
need to talk too much about that.
But Flip, even that high in the draft, people are worried about the multi-position. I love filling out my lineup with flexibility in the mid rounds and a little bit later, but I'm taking BPA.
Not at 1-1. Yeah.
No, 1-1. I mean, guy's nickname's McJesus.
Hey, this guy, you have to tune into Locked On Sens, tune into the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. Get your stuff straight, people, and tap in, because if you're not taking McJesus number 1 overall, I'll be taking your fantasy money in my pocket. Thanks.
That's awesome. Okay, so give me your top 5 then, because if it's so easy at the top, like McDavid 1, Flip, I know I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but like,
yeah.
Or you know what? Either your top 5, or if you want to single out one guy who you have in the top 10, who you don't think everyone else does, a guy that you're maybe a little higher on than most.
Ooh, those are 2 very good questions. If you don't have Nathan McKinnon, Kirill Kaprizov, I've talked a lot about. I think he's going to have a huge season. Austin Matthews has to be right up in there. And Leon Draisaitl should be as well. I don't think he deserves to be first overall. Those are all triple-digit players. You can't really go wrong with any of them. I don't know. That's a really good question because, again, and I mentioned it earlier, it really breaks down to how your draft is shaken out. Because it will tweak things slightly. But those 5 that I just mentioned, I don't think you can go wrong with either of them as the first pick in your draft, even, from 1 all the way down. If they can slip down to 8, I think Steele got Kirill Kaprizov at 8 in one of these leagues. Nice. Kirill Kaprizov is in for a huge season, and I think he actually has the potential to potentially pace the league in scoring. That's how good I think he is.
I was banging his drum on Locked On NHL mid-season as like a Hart candidate, like easily top 5, but I then turned my attention, #goalie-friendly show, to Igor Shesterkin as well. Who do you think the top goalie is quickly? Like we talked about the top forward. I know Steele, you said a little bit later on in the draft, or it was you the one that takes the goalie a little later and Flip a little earlier, but who's the first goalie off the board? Is it Vasilevsky or Shesterkin?
I think Flip and I had this discussion as well. I think it should be Igor Shesterkin. But again, like we're seeing in fantasy drafts that they're 8, 9, 9, 10.
It's just like in the NHL draft. When one goalie goes, then a few others go right after, right?
Oh, yeah.
Similar?
Yeah, and I've been talking a lot about Ilya Sorokin as well.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people need to pay attention to this goalie. And I said, Steele has mentioned it. I've mentioned it. Those 3 Russian goalies, if for whatever reason NHL players go back to the Olympics, all of a sudden a weakness of that Russian team for decades is now a huge strength. But, there are some the goaltending position this year, I don't know, if you guys agree or not. It feels more wide open than it has in a while. After those couple of elite tier goalies, you have a huge pack of secondary and third tier goalies. So it's got to be those 2. But honestly, right after that, I'd be fine with firing Ilya Sorokin right off the 3rd.
Yeah, he's definitely a good option. I think the only concern there is the Islanders. Can they bounce back after that bad season? Because sure, his goals against and save percentage were awesome, but lacking in the W department a little bit there. So that's one thing to look at. Now, I want to ask you guys, what's maybe like a non-conventional stat that doesn't have to necessarily be a part of your fantasy league, but a stat that you'll look at to try to get an extra edge on evaluating guys and how you rank them, like whether it's time on ice, Corsi, what have you, like whatever stat it is. Steele, I'll toss this one over to you. Is there a specific extra stat that's not in your categories that still you hold a lot of value to when creating rankings?
Yeah, there's a couple of them. Like obviously the leagues that I'm in, that obviously the settings and stats are changed a little bit. Like there's a few leagues where the plus and minus is in there, and I know that's a little unconventional, but that's also a big stat I look at because obviously the bigger their plus minus is, the better they're playing in the more competition they have on the ice or chemistry they have on the ice with their teammates. But one of the big ones I actually look at is shorthanded points, because I think that's something a lot of people don't really look at. And that's actually what I've been looking at the last couple of weeks as well. Shorthanded attempts. And, Alex Formenton I believe he led the league in shorthanded points last year alongside a guy who I really like in the later rounds in Trevor Moore. I think he's got that opportunity with the LA Kings now. I think he's found his chemistry alongside Victor Arvidsson and Philip Deneau on the second line. I think he's 26 or 27. He's got that shorthanded capabilities to find the breakaways and bury as well. So again, the shorthanded points I really do look at. I don't know it's small, but they do bring some extra value.
Flip, do you load up on teams you think are going to be good, or do you try to spread the wealth out?
Great question. I usually do, and good topic. This would be a good year to do that with the Ottawa Senators. And just to finish up your point very quickly, Pilsy, goals expected per 60 is an interesting one.
Okay.
And you look at a player like Seth Jarvis, and actually led the Carolina Hurricanes last year in goals expected per 60. And I know we're trying to help these listeners out. I've touted Seth Jarvis all over the airwaves the past few weeks. I hope he has a good season because I can feel the hate coming on Twitter. But yeah, that's another one to look at for sure, and double circle that kid's name.
I like that. The reason I brought up teams is you mentioned LA and Trevor Moore. I think they're a team where I'd be looking to scoop up a couple of their guys that kind of fly under the radar now with Kevin Fiala kind of pushing everyone down a little bit. Is this the year that Quentin Byfield breaks out? You mentioned Jake Sanderson earlier, Steele, but Flip, is there another rookie that you'd be looking to get early on in the draft? Obviously, we saw Mason McTavish at World Juniors. He could be a guy who goes into LA or Anaheim rather and starts strong, but who's one of these rookies that you're looking at that could really make an impact? That smile tells me it's Mason McTavish.
It is Mason McTavish.
It's that's Steele's guy, and I've been talking about Cole Perfetti on the Winnipeg
my
Jets.
Backyard, buddy.
There you go.
Cole Perfetti, I think, the book is out on Winnipeg. I really don't know what's going to happen with that team. I don't think it's going to be an overall good season in Winnipeg. Who knows? But Cole Perfetti is going to get a chance to play along the right side with some good forwards in Winnipeg. What do you want to say about their overall output? They're going to score some goals, and those top six forwards can get it done. Nikolai Ehlers, Blake Wheeler, Mark Scheifele, and others. So I think Cole Perfetti is going to get a very good chance, and I would also double circle his name in some deeper formats.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think I was just at the rookie practice before they went to Penticton. He was flying. Obviously, he probably wouldn't have even been there if he wasn't recovering from injury, much like Shane Pinto was for Ottawa's rookie tournament. But yeah, I think he's penciled in right now to start with Kyle Connor and Pierre-Luc Dubois on the top line. And you're just looking at guys who can move the puck offensively. And some D that can get him the puck too. Obviously, Josh Morrissey is going to be out there when they are for most times. Last question, fellas. Your overall sleeper of the year. Flip, I'll start with you.
Hey, I say a lot about sticking to my guns when I throw out predictions, and that's what you have to do when you're out here every day making them. And I'm going to go with the winger in Detroit and Jakub Vrana. I know he's had some injury problems before, but this is a guy who's proven that when he's healthy, he is a sniper. He is a pure goal scorer. And now all of a sudden, he's going to have some more room to move around in Detroit. There's some other bodies in the mix now up front. David Perron, Andrew Kopp, going to free up the space for some of these younger players for sure. And I would say Jakub Vrana, I know expectations are up in Detroit, much like in the nation's capital in Ottawa. But I really do think Jakub Vrana is a guy you could pounce on in the later rounds. And I think he's going to have at least 40, 45. I could see 50 points this year, and that's a valuable 50 points.
Steele, what about you?
Yeah, I'm the same with Flip. I'm sticking with my guns here, and I've talked about this guy a lot recently, and that's Tanner Jeannot of the Nashville Predators. I think a lot of people are sleeping on this guy. They have him really ranked low on fantasy draft boards, and I really like what he brings to the table. Like as of right now, the lineups, he is playing on the third line, but we don't know if that's finalized yet. I really do see him getting a shot playing with Mikael Granlund and Nito Niederreiter switching over to the right-hand side as well and playing top 6 minutes with those guys. But a lot of people are sleeping on him. They don't think he can get up close to 25 goals again. I think he can. He has a really underrated shot. He just somehow finds a way to put the puck in the back of the net. And again, he's great for banger leagues. He's one of the top guys who hits in the league as well. And really, it's, again, just trying to get that opportunity in the top 6 forward group.
He's so nasty and big guy too. Yeah, I like Tanner Jeannot as a guy. As long as he can get some opportunity up the lineup, especially on a pretty deep Nashville team. All right, Pills, you got a last question?
Yeah, so on the flip side of sleepers, who are some players you got to stay woke on and know that, hey,
you could steal.
Let's avoid these players heading into the draft. A lot of people are going to put these players on pedestals. They're going to draft them too early, but Who are the guys, Flip, I'll start with you. Who is the guy that you are just flat out avoiding?
Actually, I have two, and both of them I think people can kind of expect. Chris Kreider is not going to touch near 50 goals again. If you look at his career longevity, and that's not to say he's not going to score maybe 28. Hey, he scores 28 to 30 goals. It's still a good season for him. But if you look at projections and you end up burning a pick on him in the second round or something like that, he ain't getting 50 again. I know the Rangers are good, but that's not happening. I'm avoiding Chris Kreider till the later rounds, that's for sure. And secondly is Darcy Kemper. I'm worried about what might happen in Washington this year, and I know he's a name. I know he just won the Cup with Colorado. That's why some of these earlier fantasy people who are just new to the game see, oh, Darcy Kemper, that's a bit of a name. Washington might be in for a tough season. A couple of big injuries to Tom Wilson and Nick Backstrom. I don't know what happens in Washington this year overall, so Kemper's another guy. Later rounds of the draft, or maybe avoid at all costs.
This one might be a little bold to say, but I would be very wary of taking Jack Hughes too early. I know he's a very talented player. He's got a ton of skill. And when he does play and when he's healthy, he's one of the best centermen out there. But he gets injured way too many times in the season to hold that value that he brings when he is healthy. So I'm not saying don't draft him at all, but you got to be wary and not take him too early, because I've actually seen him fall. I've seen someone take him in the second round, and then I've also seen another person take him later in like the 12th or 13th round. I think there's got to be a middle. That was some range there. So I think you got to be really aware of not taking him too early, but also not too late. You got to be in the middle of somewhere of 2 and 13, obviously.
I love that. All right, for more fantasy hockey tips, strategy, and more, go check out the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast wherever you get your podcast, and available on YouTube. Flip, Steele, really appreciate you guys joining us today, and we look forward. We're gonna touch base with you throughout the season, get some smart waiver wire pickups and ways that you can get, if you get off to a slow start, like I've been doing the last few years in fantasy hockey. You guys are gonna be my secret weapon in how to regroup right after that. So appreciate your time, boys, and we look forward to seeing your continued growth of your show as well. We're cheering for you guys.
Thanks for having us.
Stick taps to Steele and Flip. Make sure you're following along with the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. I know there's a Sens game tonight, but we're doing things a little bit different. Like we said, we'll have a full breakdown of that game coming up on tomorrow's show with
a Sens Central citizen. You guys know it's Wednesday, so we always get a citizen on, and that citizen is Reese Sabolsky. He tells us an interesting story, how him and his family got into hockey and some of his hopes for the next season.
So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, you can follow us online at Sens Central on Twitter and lockedon.senators on Instagram. Please follow the show and subscribe on YouTube. It goes a long way for us. But for today, we say goodbye. For Brandon Piller, I'm Ross Levitan. Enjoy the game tonight. We'll talk to you tomorrow. This has been the Locked On Senators podcast. It's your team every day.